My name is Billy Yoon. I'm 68 years old, and I was actually born at Daniel Freeman Memorial Hospital in Inglewood, California.
Do you have a Korean name?
I don't have an official Korean name, but my paternal grandmother, Rosa, gave me a Korean name, which is Sungjin.
Songjin. Do you know if it has a meaning?
I really don't know what it means. My sister used to joke and say that her Korean name meant like a beautiful meadow full of flowers, and my Korean name meant like a cow pasture. So,
No.
yeah, so I'm sure that's not correct.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not. Okay, Songjin. And then, how do you identify? So, for example, what generation, race, ethnicity, gender, preferred pronoun do you identify with?
I'm actually third generation American Korean. And weirdly enough, I tend to use the word American first.
Yeah.
I've always found it weird that we use the divisive term first and the uniting term second.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to refer to myself as an American Korean.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak Hangul. I'm third generation. I think it's called Samse. And the only time my parents actually spoke Hangul is when one of the kids were in trouble and they didn't want us to know what they were talking about.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I know words and phrases in Korean, but for my life I could not complete a complete sentence. And the one thing in Korean that really loses me is the levels, because it depends upon if you're talking down to someone, across to your equal, or up to your superior.
Yeah,
And that's where I get really lost.
yeah. I feel like I even get lost with that too. Yeah. And you said you were born in Inglewood. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Mid-City, LA. In the old days, we used to call it Midtown. It's south and west of LA, of Koreatown now.
Okay.
Although probably in about 3 to 5 years, it will be part of Koreatown. A lot of the people moving into my neighborhood right now are Korean.
Okay. Interesting.
So it's much different, but basically down by La Brea in Washington.
And then you moved to K-Town later?
No, I live in the house my parents bought in 1954.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was my parents bought that house in 1954, and in 1954 that was about as far north as Koreans could buy land. You couldn't buy land like in Hancock Park. You couldn't really buy land like in areas like the Valley,
Yeah.
things like that, Beverly Hills, Westwood, West LA.
Yeah.
That's why the Korean community, when they left Riverside, originally settled down by Western and 45th, Western and 41st. That's why Korean Presbyterian Church is on Jefferson, a block east of Normandy, because it was walking distance for most of the Korean community that was living in LA.
Yeah. Yeah. So that kind of goes into, we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about your family's history, especially in Koreatown. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how your family came to the States and then how you guys ended up in LA?
My grandfather on my mom's side, the Park side, Chung-suk, he left Korea, I believe, in 1904, fleeing the Japanese occupation. My mom said that the village elders told him to leave. Said, you have no future as long as the Japanese army is in Korea. So he was recruited by a Presbyterian minister and went to Hawaii and basically worked in the plantations in Hawaii. And then he was contacted by Dosan Anchang Ho, who apparently knew who my grandfather was, or at least knew his family. And Dosan basically sent him a letter and said, come to Riverside. There are other Koreans here in Riverside. So my grandfather moved to Riverside. Dosan helped my grandfather find his first job, find his first place to live, basically got him situated in the community. And my grandfather eventually saved his money and started up a little produce stand that became a little produce store. And he used to drive his little Model T pickup truck from Riverside into downtown LA produce market every morning in the middle of the night, pick up fresh produce and drive it back. And he would sell to the community and also to other like little stores and restaurants in Riverside. My grandmother on my dad's side, on my mom's side, Chung Kyung Lee, her and my grandfather were actually in arranged marriage. And theirs was kind of unusual because usually the girl was older than the guy in Joseon period arranged marriages. My grandfather was like 10 years older than my grandmother. And when he left Korea, he promised her that someday they would be together again, that he would come back for her. And he saved his money, and somewhere around 1914 or somewhere in there, he was able to bring my grandmother over to the United States. And then he was also able to bring his brother, Youngsup, his sister, Aija, and his mother, Shangsun. And I think his mother is one of the few from her generation to ever make it to the United States. Because my great-grandmother, Shangsun, was born before the Civil War started.
Oh, wow.
In the 1850s. So I think she's one of the very few that made it to the United States. On my father's side, I don't know as much about my grandfather's. On my dad's side, my grandfather was Kyung Hak Yoon. He was enormous. He was 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, extremely strong. All my aunts and uncles used to tell me stories about how strong he was. When he first got here, he actually didn't come in through Hawaii. He actually came in through San Francisco. And from San Francisco, he apparently moved to Sacramento area and worked in the rice fields because his family, I guess, were rice merchants in Korea before he left. And so he worked in the rice fields, and eventually he moved down into Central California into an area called Reedley. Reedley, Dinuba, Valencia, Visalia, all the little towns up there between Bakersfield and Fresno. And he eventually got into the peach packing and picking business, and that's what they were doing for a living. That my dad learned how to drive a truck when he was like 13 years old because he was driving a truck around the orchards.
Wow.
My grandmother on my dad's side was named Rosa Cho, and her father, they were on what we call the lost boat. And there was a boat that was supposed to go from Korea to Hawaii. And instead of going to Hawaii, the boat went to Mexico because the Chinese ship owner has apparently sold the entire, all the Koreans on the boat to the Mexican government as indentured servants or slaves.
Wow. Whoa.
And they basically went to the west coast of Mexico, dumped them, and left. And somehow a lot of them wound up on the east coast of Mexico in a little town called Merida on the Yucatan Peninsula. And I'm not exactly sure how it is they went all the way across Mexico to the other side.
Yeah.
But there are still descendants of Koreans living in Merida. I actually found out I have a cousin in Merida that I never knew about. And so my grandmother, her mother passed away in Mexico. Her father was apparently some kind of a like martial art instructor or some kind of military instructor, and he wanted to go back to Korea to fight the Japanese, and he basically put out a notice to the Koreans in the United States who were aware that there were Koreans in Mexico. So my great grandfather, Mr. Cho, wanted to go back to Korea. And he basically put out a notice to the Koreans in the United States, hey, I have a daughter, I want her to get married. And so my grandfather, I guess, decided, well, I'll drive down to Mexico and check it out. And went down, met my grandmother, decided, okay, fine, let's get married. Showed up at the border with my grandmother and her little sister, Maria. My grandmother, I think, was like 15 or 16 at the time. And her sister, I guess, was about 8 or 10. But they basically told the border guards that was their daughter, and the border guards let them through.
Oh.
So as far as I know, technically my Aunt Maria was an illegal immigrant for like 90 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's how we wound up here. My my grandmother settled down in Reedley area, and apparently she was involved in the first March 1st march in Danuba.
Yes, it was very big.
Yeah,
it was the first one ever.
Yeah, I have pictures of it, and I keep looking and they're trying to see my grandmother. But apparently she was involved in that, and that my dad was born in 1917, so he might have been like a little junior high school kid walking in the parade. Yeah, that's about how we came here, and like I said, pretty much everybody settled in the area in South Central LA, the north end of South Central LA. The other thing is there were also a lot of Japanese Americans in the Crenshaw district, and actually up and down Olympic Boulevard, Pico Boulevard, between Crenshaw or actually between like La Brea and Vermont. On Olympic, on Pico, on Venice, on Washington, on Adams, all the way down. Probably two of the biggest Japanese American institutions were Holiday Bowl, and everybody went there, and it was Japanese owned, but they had a restaurant that was open 24 hours a day that served Hawaiian, Japanese, Chinese, and American food. And after the clubs let out on a Friday or Saturday night, the line would actually be going out the door and down the sidewalk to get into Holiday Inn's restaurant. The other place that was kind of universal among the entire Crenshaw crowd was a Japanese-owned bakery called Grace's Pastries. And I tell people, the thing about Grace's that was in Holiday Bowl, actually that was unique, was everyone from Crenshaw went there. Whites, Asians, Chinese, Japanese, blacks, Hispanic, everybody was at Grace's Pastries. Everybody was at Holiday Bowl.
So when was this? Like, we want to ask you kind of like what your childhood was like. So for you, we just kind of wanted to ask like a little bit about the family dynamic, kind of like what language was spoken at home. I know you said you didn't grow up speaking, but kind of like, what type of food was eaten at home then? If it wasn't like, if you weren't immersed in the language, what type of food? Were you exposed to any sort of Korean culture growing up? And just kind of like Korean language schools or any family traditions, Korean or not? Can you just kind of go into kind of your childhood? Yeah.
I never went to Korean language school, and I was actually kind of glad because all my Japanese friends had to go to J school on Saturdays. And like I said, the only time my parents actually spoke Korean was when one of us was in trouble. They didn't want us to know what they were talking about. So if I heard a bunch of Korean and then I heard Billy and then a bunch more Korean, that's when I started going to the door.
You're like, it's time for me to go out.
Yeah. My father's father, my grandfather, Kyung-hak, never thought Korea was going to be free. Never, ever thought Korea was going to be free. And he apparently told the family, we're in America now, we're in Americans now, we will speak English now. And so my father could speak Korean and understand it. He couldn't read and write Korean. My mother could read and write Korean, and her Korean was actually very good. Although my mother says that all modern Korean is not true Korean. She goes, that is not the language I learned from my father. She says the inflections, the intonations, everything is different. And she says all modern Korean sounds like Japanese to her.
That's a good segue actually into what we wanted to ask you about, the kind of the differences between first gen, second gen, third gen. You have a unique, vantage point of being third gen, which is very hard to come across nowadays. And so I guess our question to you is like, how would you describe third gen Korean Americans? And I'm a second gen, so oftentimes we feel like we need to be that bridge between like Korean and American cultures. And so for you, like, did you feel like a pressure to meet certain, expectations, or, how would you overall describe the third gen experience?
Third gens are Americans. I actually tell Koreans that. I actually tell them your grandchildren will be like me. They will be raised on pizza, tacos, and hamburgers. They will pretty much lose the language. And they will be Americans. I mean, you asked earlier about what we ate. my mom was actually considered one of the best cooks in the entire early Korean community. And her grandmother, Chung Kyung, was apparently trained to cook in the royal courts of Korea.
Whoa, that's cool.
So we would have these big picnics, like for the Korean Presbyterian Church, or what they called the old AKCO, the American Korean Civic Organization. And you notice how they put American first too, because this was in the 50s after they saw the Japanese intern during World War II. So the emphasis was always on putting American first. But we would have these huge picnics, and my mom would make mung bean muk. And she had this pot that was like this big, and it would be filled almost to the top with mung bean muk. And for those of you that don't know, mung bean muk is an incredibly arduous task to make. It takes like days. And my mom would make trays and trays of mung bean muk and take them, and everybody would love her muk. So that's the one thing she would always take. I still remember one Thanksgiving at my Uncle Bud's house, and my Uncle Johnny is walking around and he has a plate full of nothing but muk, covered with yangyam. And it's like, Uncle Johnny, aren't you going to eat any turkey and stuffing? And he goes, the only time that I can get turkey and stuffing any day of the year. This is the only time I can get your mother's muk. And so my mom would always make extra, and so everybody could take it home too.
That's so cute.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
But I mean, our food rotation was kind of a mix between American and Korean.
Yeah.
My mom would make changjidum, she'd make kalbi, she'd make mandu. I remember having to grind the meat for the mandu. I remember stirring the pot. This is two things I did as a kid. Was this, because I was always grinding things, or this, because I was always stirring things. Keep stirring the pot. Don't let it get hard. Yeah, it's like Easter, you have a ham. Thanksgiving, you have a turkey. Christmas, you always have a roast beef. I remember we always get a rib roast from an old store called Fedco that used to be in LA. But then the rest of the time, we ate Korean food. My mom made her own kimchi. She made her own oi kimchi. She made her own mu kimchi. She'd make, I forgot what they call them. What are the little fried patties with squash in it?
Chun? Or
Chun?
no, chun?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But
very traditional.
the way my mom makes chun is, instead of like frying one big piece of squash, she would grate it up.
Oh, so thin.
Yeah, so real thin little grated pieces, or chop it up real fine, and then mix that up and make little patties and cook it that way.
That sounds
And then
good.
always, you need to do it that way. If you've been doing it the other way, it's all wrong.
Insider tip, yeah.
And it's just like kalbi. I don't know if you guys saw the picture of kalbi. My mom says that all modern kalbi is Japanese.
Oh.
Kalbi is not supposed to be sweet.
Oh.
I have my grandmother's original yangyam recipe. There is no sugar in it at all. No honey,
Interesting.
nothing sweet. Okay? Number two, you get a flat steak with 3 bones in the bottom. Wrong. Totally wrong.
The cut is wrong.
Yeah, totally wrong. The first time I saw that in a Korean restaurant, they gave that to me. I said, what the heck is this? This is not kalbi. My mom made what apparently is called royal style Korean kalbi. And you start out with a block of kalbi, so you have the bone on the bottom, and you have a couple inches of meat on the top. Then you cut down every half an inch in one direction, every half an inch in the other direction. So now you have all these little fingers of meat hanging on the bone. You marinate it for 15 to 20 minutes, because otherwise it gets too salty. But the marinade penetrates 5 out of the 6 sides of each finger.
Wow.
And when you cook it, you grab them and you spread them out from the center, and you place it face down on the grill.
That's very different.
Yeah.
I don't think
Totally
I've ever
different.
seen
Yeah.
it be like that.
Yeah. and
Yeah,
it
one of these
seems-
days you guys buy a bunch
yeah,
of short
it
ribs,
seems-
come over to my house, I'll cook
Oh
it
my
for you.
god, yeah, thank you for that. It seems like you had like a very, like you still had that exposure because, your mother like learned from her grandmother who was learning and serving the rural courts.
Mhm.
We wanna, and you said you helped out in the kitchen. I kinda wanna go into more of like your childhood and also your teenage like years. So you grew up in the 70s and you're in high
I
school.
grew up in the 60s.
Okay, and in high school, when was that then?
I was in high school, okay, I went to Altaloma Elementary School, which
Okay.
is in Midtown. I went to Mount Vernon Junior High, which is now known as Johnny Cochran. Apparently Mount Vernon was so bad that at one point it got taken over by the state government, and they fired the entire administrative staff.
Wow.
Yeah, that's my school. And then after that I went to LA High, so I'm a Roman.
LA High, okay.
yeah.
So I want you to kind of tell me like, what were kind of like the key trends and memorable things you remember from high school? So kind of like, what was the demographic like? What was your friend group like? Was it a mix of like, other Asians? You told me that there was a lot of other Japanese Americans there. And what were you like as a teenager? I want to kind of hear about
I was a
you.
little squid.
Yeah, just kind of tell us about your high school experience.
LA High was kind of interesting because I had like two different groups of friends. I had my black friends who grew up in the neighborhood with me, so my neighbors, my friends from the neighborhood. But then I also had a lot of Japanese American friends. I still have a lot of Japanese American friends. One of the things about school is you go stand by the kids that look like you. And the second biggest ethnic group at LA High when I was there was Japanese Americans. LA High was about 2,200 students, 2,200 students. 400, 500 of them were Japanese Americans,
Wow.
like 15, 20% of the school.
How many were Korean American?
Me.
You were the
Wow.
only one.
Me, and there was one other American-born Korean American, Harold Park, and then there was a girl named Laura Lee. And that was it.
Wow.
And then there were 3 white kids in the entire school.
Oh, wow.
School was 75% black, and there weren't that very many Hispanics there at the time.
Interesting.
At the time, Asians outnumbered Hispanics at LA High, although now LA High is like 70% Hispanic. So it's much, much different. The other thing about most of my friends being Japanese American is being Asian, you're always put in the advanced math science classes. And so because I was in the advanced math science classes, 90% of the kids in there were Japanese American. Like literally like everybody was Japanese American. There were a couple, there were like, I don't know, 5, 10 Chinese kids at the school. And so they were probably in those classes too because they were pretty smart. But yeah, it was almost all Japanese American. When I was in high school, I might have known more conversational Japanese than I knew Korean.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, did you pick up a lot of Japanese while you were in school?
Yeah, actually, I did that in reading the book Shogun. But I know how to say things like "Gomen nasai nihongo ga hanasemasen," which is "I'm sorry, I don't speak Japanese." And then I know how to say rice in like 7 different languages because that's like the most important word in the world to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did pick up a lot of Japanese. I hung out with a lot of Japanese, and I always considered myself to be kind of a synthesis Asian. Because when I grew up, most people didn't even know what a Korean was.
Right.
I still remember being a little kid in the playground sitting on a swing and having a little black girl walk up to me and go, "Are you Chinese?" "No." "Are you Japanese?" "No." And then she stood there looking really confused and she goes, "Well, what are you then?" And like I said, most people had never even heard of a Korean. Most of my friends were Japanese. I'm Korean. My girlfriend, back old years, most of them were Japanese because there were no Korean girls to date. And if there were, they were my cousins, in which case I couldn't date them anyway. And I studied Chinese Kung Fu, and I love Chinese food. So, I'm kind of a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's like I tell people, I'm pretty much an American. Koreans don't like to hear this, but when I was younger, I used to say if the United States ever went to war against Korea, I'd be shooting Koreans. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you're not going to meet a lot of Koreans that can say, my father, his brother, and all 5 of my mom's brothers were in the United States Army during World War II.
Right.
My father was with an anti-aircraft unit. He drove one of the big Army trucks with the dual 50 cal machine guns in the back. They landed one day after D-Day, merged with the advancing frontline infantry, drove from France to Belgium to Germany, were one of the units that was cut off by the Battle of the Bulge. So at one point they were completely surrounded by the German army in the middle of the winter. And his unit was one of the units, and I did not know this until recently, that went to Dachau. And Dachau was one of the German Holocaust camps. There was actually a Twilight Zone episode about Dachau. And that's, once I saw that, it's like, well, that's another reason Dad never talked about the war.
Yeah.
You know? But I still remember, like in the 60s, he would get together with 6, 10, 12 of his old Army buddies. And they would get together like once a year and they'd go to lunch. You know, that's how close they were.
And then moving on to like your college years. Where did you go for college?
I went to UCLA.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I'm a Bruin.
I'm also a Bruin.
Oh, no.
Should we do an 8 clap? But yeah, I went to UCLA. But this is weird. When I was in elementary school, they skipped me a whole year. Back then, we had what they called the old A2, B2 system. So you could actually start school in the middle of the year in January. So I skipped the A2, and they, you know, I did 1 semester in 2nd grade. They threw me into the 3rd grade. And then when they got to the 6th grade, LAUSD was going to get rid of the A2, B2 system, or the AB system. And so they told my parents, we have 2 choices. We can keep him here in elementary school, but we have nothing left to teach him. Or we can send him to junior high. So my parents said, we'll send him to junior high. Big mistake. Biggest mistake of my life. Because now I'm in junior high and high school, and I'm a year younger than everyone else in my class. I'm smaller than everyone else in my class. All the girls are older than me in my class. I honestly think that was the biggest mistake that my parents made, was skipping me a year. They should have left me with my own age kids.
Right, with your cohort. Yeah. So, did you like UCLA? You know, how did you get there? And yeah, tell me just kind of like the key memories and events that you remember from UCLA.
I hated being at UCLA.
Really?
Well, see, this is the thing. I was pretty smart as a kid. And all my life I had been told, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor. No one ever asked me if I wanted to be a doctor. I got to UCLA, I'm on a full pre-med scholarship, grants, scholarships, the whole thing. I had the 2nd highest SAT scores in my school. I had the 8th or 9th highest GPA in my school. And if I hadn't gotten a B in ceramics, I probably would have had a higher GPA than that. But no one ever asked me if I wanted to be a doctor. And I went to UCLA for 2 years. First time in my life I ever got a D in a class, because I just didn't want to be there. In the 7th day of my 7th quarter, I walked into Murphy Hall, walked up to the window and said, how does one go about withdrawing? And then I went home and told my parents, and they were not thrilled with that.
Yeah, I bet.
But the thing is the one thing I always wanted to do when I was a kid was draw. The reason I always did good in elementary school, because I finished all my tasks fast so I could take extra paper and draw. And nobody ever figured that out. My parents actually had the chance to send me to an advanced painting drawing thing when I was like in the 6th grade, and they said no. I mean, even in high school, I remember one of my high school counselors telling me, you don't have time to take useless classes like art. And yet now I have a BFA in art, and I've taught art for 15 years. So, you know, who was right and who was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, it seems like that time was like finally figuring out what it is that you wanted to do. And so like we're in that like kind of, me and Janice both, we're kind of this post-grad season of our lives. We're like, is this what I really want to commit to? You know, it sounds like you kind of had that moment for yourself as well. So for you, like, where did you find your community? You know, where did you find yourself? And like, what was kind of the path that you know, followed after that, especially when you figured out that it was art that you were very interested in?
Actually, what I did then was I went to cars.
Mm-hmm.
I was always really into cars. After UCLA, I used to work at the Ralphs on Olympic and Western, where the Galleria Market is there. That was store number 4. But after UCLA, I quit Ralph's and I went to work for a place called Induction Engineering Company Corporation in Santa Monica on Broadway and 14th. And they made high performance parts for Volkswagen Bugs, Chevrolet Corvairs, Ford Pintos, Chevy Vegas. And so I started working there, and I started building race cars. This sounds insane, but in 1975, my dad bought a Honda Civic that eventually I took over payments for, so it became mine. And I built the heck out of that thing. 30 years before Fast and Furious, I've been told that I had the first highly modified street racing Honda Civic in the United States.
Whoa.
Some of the Honda guys, because I'm still into Hondas, I worked for Honda for a while. Some of the Honda guys call me the Honda OG or Honda Yoda, which is pretty funny.
Honda Yoda.
But I actually have pictures on my phone of my old 75 Civic, if you guys want to see
you
it.
have to show us that later.
And then I built an 84 Civic because I was working for Harbor City Honda at the time. So I built an 84 Civic that was ridiculously fast. And then those stupid Fast and Furious movies came out, and suddenly the law enforcement started paying attention to my car.
Where they had him before.
Yeah, where they totally ignored me before, and I would get pulled over randomly for no reason. I still remember when I was living in San Gabriel, and I'm driving down, I think it was Valley, and the sheriffs had like five or eight like Chinese guys pulled over on the other side of the street, you know, with their little race cars. And I go by in the other direction. Sheriff jumps in his car, makes a U-turn in the middle of the street, chases me down, pulls me over. And he walks up to my window, and I looked at him and I says, "So why did you pull me over?" I'm completely mystified. And he points to the guys over there, these young guys, the young Chinese guys, and he goes, "You're not with them?" And I looked at him, I go, "I'm a 45-year-old public school teacher. Hell no, I'm not with them." And the guy just gave me back my license, said, "Your tail light's out," and walked away. And I knew my tail light wasn't out. So, but yeah, I mean, Japanese Americans, most people don't realize, actually started the entire lowered car craze. That was actually started by one of my friends named Doug Endo in Gardena. He worked at Gardena Datsun, and back then the big thing was what they call a Datsun 510, which is a little 2-door, 4-door sedan. But 510s become famous because they were winning SCCA Trans Am racing. You know, Datsun sponsored a team, and so everybody that had a Datsun 510, and I must have had 20 friends with Datsun 510s, lowered them, flared them, built the engines, you know, modified them.
Okay, so you were fully in that crowd, and you were there at the beginning of that movement, really.
Yeah.
Of all those modifications. We do want to talk a little bit more about the Koreatown landscape. And then you are really just like, you've seen so much change. Seriously, like you've been here, you know, in the South Central area to even now Mid-City to the sprawling new K-Town that it is. What are those key changes that you're seeing in Koreatown through your years? And then, you know, like kind of talking about like, you know, think about those big moments of change, like the civil unrest, you know, or the LA riots. Just kind of, yeah, tell us kind of your K-Town experience and, yeah.
Back in the old days, mostly I went to K-Town for several reasons. There was a Vons on Olympic and Crenshaw, where the spa is. That used to be a Vons market. That was the market my mom always shopped at. There was a restaurant on the corner of Norton and Olympic, which is now a Korean restaurant, Han Sushi, that used to be a little Japanese restaurant. Both of the liquor stores farther down Olympic Boulevard by Wilton on the north and south side, those were both owned by Japanese Americans.
Okay.
The Ralph's at Olympic and Western, store number 4 that I used to work at, probably 20% to 25% of the entire crew was Japanese American. And then the biggest thing in Olympic Boulevard was Uptown Nursery. There was a big Japanese American nursery there. A lot of people don't realize that in the 50s and 60s, Japanese Americans dominated the gardening industry in LA. Most of the gardeners were Japanese. I actually used to joke with my service manager, because when I worked at Bill Cross Honda, I started taking care of some of the plants and trees there. And he'd always make fun of me about being an Asian gardener, and I'd always laugh and I'd say, yeah, I just want to be rich enough to have a white gardener. So, yeah, and then the other main reason we went to what's now Koreatown is there used to be a Mexican restaurant called El Grito.
Oh, okay.
And they had like the best Mexican food. Do you guys know who George Takei is, the actor
Yeah.
from Star Trek, the original Star Trek?
Well, I don't know.
If you saw his picture.
Yeah, everybody calls him Uncle George now. But George Takei used to eat at the El Grito all the time. It's like every third time I would go in there, I'd see George Takei there. He used to walk into the Ralph's on Olympic and Western on Saturday mornings all the time, because his mom, he grew up right by there. His mom's house was a couple blocks away, and so he'd be visiting his mom on Saturday, come walking in the store, shorts, t-shirt, sandals, you know, buy orange juice or milk or cereal, hang out at the magazine rack, walk out the door.
Wow. So I know like that in that era it was very like, you know, Japanese community immigrant dominated. And then you were really at the center of like, you know, hanging out with like, you know, African Americans, Japanese Americans. And so for you, kind of like, I guess the personal question is like when the LA riots were happening, like how did you feel? Kind of like, because a lot of it was like Korean versus Black tension.
Yeah.
And so like, what was that like for you?
When the riot started, I was teaching in Pasadena. And I had gotten home, I was watching television in my room, and then the riot started. And I remember telling my parents, you go watch television in my room, I'm going to sit out here in the front room with the rifle.
Oh, so you stood out there.
Yeah, I just sat in my front room, but my family has been in that neighborhood for so long, and basically the schoolyard Crips in that neighborhood know who I am. The 18th Street gangsters know who I am. Schoolyard Crips consider me an OG, an original gangster. 18th Street considers me familia. So I have zero fear in my neighborhood. When the riots started, I actually went to school in Pasadena every single day. I still remember Thursday driving to school. I got on the Santa Monica Freeway. There was like 5 other cars on the freeway with me going east toward downtown. And then coming home Thursday, I came through downtown LA on the Santa Monica Freeway like 95 miles an hour. And there was me and one guy, white guy in a white BMW. And we were both going 95 miles an hour down the Santa Monica Freeway. And I started to move over to get off at Crenshaw. And I still remember this guy looking out the window at me like, what are you doing? You can't get off at Crenshaw.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm cool. I'm from the hood.
You're like going into the thick of it, basically.
Yeah. But a lot of what happened with the riots after the initial start, a lot of that was just opportunism. I still remember one of my students standing, I only had like 2 or 3 students per class during the riots, but I still remember one of my students standing there and we were talking about the riots, and he said, Mr. Yoon, most of these people don't give a rat's ass about Rodney King. And I remember looking and said, now you're learning. You know, because I mean, you had people breaking into jewelry stores in Hollywood. On Sunset and La Brea, there used to be a big, like, audio video, you know, television store like Best Buy. There used to be a big thing called Circuit City. Okay?
Yeah.
Circuit City got robbed and burned to the ground, looted and burned to the ground. Everybody running out of that store was white. Every car that they were loading things into was a BMW, a Volvo, or a Range Rover. And you're going to tell me these people were protesting Rodney King? No, they were just got the opportunity to get a free big screen. You know, so there's a difference. The other thing that the riots brought up to me was the difference between the Japanese community and the Korean community in terms of way they integrated with the black community. Japanese Americans, you have to remember, lived in the same community as the blacks. They lived where their stores were. And that's why the blacks left a lot of the Japanese businesses alone. Because it's like, hey, that's my neighbor. Hey, my kid plays ball with their son. Hey, my kid goes to school with their daughter. You know, and so, it was, I mean, Holiday Bowl didn't get touched. Grace's Pastries didn't get touched. The Fedco that used to be on La Cienega and where the Target is right now, that place got looted to the ground. So it was a much, much different thing, you know, whereas the blacks considered the Japanese Americans to be part of the community. In a lot of ways, they considered the Koreans to be outsiders to the community, because many of the Koreans that owned businesses in black neighborhoods didn't live there and were not technically part of the community. And so I think that's where there was a big divide. You know, it's like like I said, I mean, the Burger King on Crenshaw and Jefferson, before they built the big building on the corner, that was a big empty lot. And every Tuesday night in the 70s, dozens of street racers would show up there. And, you know, and they'd organize races all the time. The Japanese Americans used to have big dances.
Yeah, they would organize
Yeah,
those, like,
I mean, big dances.
town dances.
And
They
the
did
whole
love
thing
that.
was, after the dance, all the street racers would come out. There used to be a big dance hall on Washington Boulevard, just this side of Figueroa, called Roger Young. And I still remember being out there one night, 2:15, dance closed. There's hundreds of Japanese American kids lining both sides of the street, and the street racers are zooming up and down both sides of the street. And
Furious, yeah.
two highway patrolmen on motorcycles pull up. And they're sitting there at the stoplight, and they're kind of, you know, watching the street racers go back and forth, and they kind of look at each other, and the light turns green, and the two highway patrolmen drag race each other all the way down Washington Boulevard toward Hoover.
Oh my gosh.
And all the Japanese American kids are
They're
clapping and cheering for them.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you taught in Pasadena.
Mhm.
So I kind of want to get into that a little bit. Kind of like, how did you get into teaching? How did you get into art? And then I guess let's talk about that first. Yeah, just really briefly, if you could just go into your how you got to become a teacher, and also about like art as well.
I hurt my back really badly when I was 21. And I actually tore ligaments in my lower back, so in theory I'm not supposed to be able to run or jump. I refuse to believe that. My parents said, you know, hey, you want to go back to school? And so I went back to Santa Monica College, and I said, the only way I'm going back to school is to study the one thing I want to study, which is art. And so I went to Santa Monica College, took art and design classes, found out that, I am really good at art. And then from there, I went back and worked on cars. I couldn't figure out what to do, so I worked at Bill Krause Honda. I started at Modesti's Honda Repair, which is a little independent. Then I worked at Bill Krause Honda, Harbor City Honda, Beverly Hills Honda, Torrance Nissan, Torrance Acura. And then it was like, there has to be something more to life than fixing cars. And my parents said, you know, if you want to move back home, you know, we'll help you go back to school. And so I went back home and I enrolled at Cal State LA. So I'm also a Golden Eagle. So I went 15 straight quarters to Cal State LA, including summers.
Wow.
Because I figured this is the only chance I'm going to get to, you know, get a degree. And I averaged like 16 units a quarter, wound up graduating magna cum laude. And for one of my projects, I had to interview another teacher, you know, or another artist. And so I picked an artist named Ben Sakaguchi, who was teaching at Pasadena City College. And I went out there and I talked to them, and he he sat down with me and talked with me even though he had a class going. And he's the one that told me, he goes, teaching is a very viable option for artists because, you know, one, you still have time to do your art, but two, you have a regular salary and you can eat and you have, you know, benefits like health coverage and stuff like that. And so I started to say, well, hey, I'll be an art teacher. You know, I found out I like working with kids. I started working with the youth group at Union Church when I was going to Union Church in Little Tokyo. And so I started taking education classes to get my degree in education. And I was out in Santa Clarita working on one of my cars. Came home like 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. And there's a message saying, hey, you know, we want to interview for our open art teacher position at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. So 8 in the morning, I drove out to Pasadena, sat down with the principal. Her name was Fran Powell at Wilson Middle School in Pasadena. And she talked to me for like 20 minutes, and she goes, I've interviewed a lot of art teachers over the last 2 weeks, and you're the one I want to hire.
Wow.
And I was like, really? And so she gave me the nickel tour of the campus, showed me my classroom, gave me my keys. And I said, well, when does school start? She goes, tomorrow. And so I became an art teacher. I became well known as an art teacher because after my second or third year, every year my advanced, number one, I created an advanced art class, and they never had one before. They only had beginning art. But two, every year my advanced art class, their final project was paint a mural at the school. And so every year they would paint a mural at some part of the school. A couple of the murals were actually featured on CNN. CNN actually called, and I still remember there was a little blonde reporter they had named Linda Joyce, and she calls me in my classroom and she goes, hi, this is Linda Joyce from CNN. And I said, yeah, right, and I hung up the phone. And she called right back. And she's like, don't hang up, don't hang up. I really am Linda Joyce. I really do work for CNN. I can prove it.
Yeah.
And so they sent a crew out and they, interviewed me, took some videos of the mural.
Yeah.
And
So where's that mural at right now?
still at Wilson Middle School.
Oh my goodness.
But they've closed the school because of lack of enrollment.
Oh.
But yeah, there's still 3 or 4 murals that we did at that school that are still there.
Yeah.
There's one inside the front door, and then the big one that CNN covered is the history of art and civilization on the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
It's 13 feet high, 70 feet wide.
Wow.
And it goes from cave painting to 1990s New York.
I'm from Pasadena and I know about Wilson, so who knows, maybe I can get the chance to I don't know, it's closed, but I'd love to see it. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and there's a big mural inside the
Yeah.
front doors of freedom fighters. So you have like Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa and Cesar Chavez.
Yeah.
And so those are right inside the front door.
Okay. Tell me about Koreana. Like, what is Koreana? And then how did you get to creating it? And what is your mission with Koreana?
I did not create Koreana. Koreana was started by John and Kathy Hahn. John Hahn was a printer for the early Korean community, and this is back in the old days when you had to handset type. He used to do like all the announcements and the Sunday programs for the Korean Presbyterian Church and for the American Korean Civic Organization. I actually have a typewriter that belonged to John that's Hangul. It's a
Wow.
1960s typewriter that's all in Hangul.
That is cool, yeah.
And so John's printing business was on Olympic Boulevard. And Kathy used to come in and help him at the printing business, and she got bored. And so she decided she wanted to open up a gift business. And she was heavily involved with the Korean Presbyterian Church. She was one of the Sunday school teachers there. And first it was, like I said, a Christian gift store, and she called it Gifts of Angels.
Oh.
And then I guess her father found out about it, and he was still in Korea, and her family was fairly well-to-do. And apparently he started buying things in Korea and just shipping them over here to her. And so at one point, I think they must have had 20 tons of Korean brass. I mean, I'm talking tons.
Just brass.
Yeah, I mean, because after the Korean War, there was no economy in Korea. And Korean women and children would walk around with baskets and collect the empty ammunition shells because there were millions of shells laying on the ground. They would turn them into the brass makers. The brass makers would make anything in the world they could think of that an American soldier might buy. Because the only people that had any money were the soldiers. And I've actually talked to Korean war vets, and they told me in the old days, outside of the main gates, in Incheon, the outside the main gates of the military base, said in the old days, both sides of the street were lined with brass shops.
Wow.
And the veteran goes, I was just there. I couldn't find a single brass shop anywhere.
Yeah.
He goes, what happened to them? I go, well, two things. They ran out of brass. And two, all their sons and daughters are now working for Hyundai and Samsung. They all went to college.
So you took over Koreana.
Yeah.
What year did you take over?
I took Koreana over, I think, 2003 or 4. Basically, I got tired of teaching.
What is it that you're selling or making now? What does it look like now under your ownership?
Basically, I'm still selling a lot of the original inventory that John and Kathy had. I've been told I have the largest collection of vintage Korean dolls in the world. I have literally hundreds of Korean dolls from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I have a lot of old things. You guys know the game Ute?
Yeah.
Okay, I have the original Ute games from the 1960s, where instead of little plastic round discs, they actually have little tiny wood people that are hand painted, and they have little bitty eyes that are painted on them, but they're about this big, and they're like little people.
How cool.
And
That's so
those are the moving pieces.
I wonder why they changed to the discs.
Yeah, but I remember as a kid going to Koreana with my mom to buy Korean gifts for relatives and friends, and I remember that Koreana was the only Korean business from downtown to the Pacific Ocean. That was it, because the old Koreatown was down on Jefferson Boulevard where the church was, and the old Koreatown was really just one block. It was like the church, the Korean National Association building, the Moksa's house in the back, one Korean restaurant, and one store, and that was Koreatown. Most people don't know that in 1970 there were less than 10,000 Koreans in the entire state of California.
Yeah.
Now I can throw a rock and I'll hit 10,000 Koreans. But Koreana, I sell a lot of dance and music equipment, although a lot of that now, the dancers and musicians bring it on their own. But mostly right now I'm just kind of clearing out the inventory of the old vintage items we have. I have like the little keychain thing, the little wood mask. I have I have dolls. Do you guys know what a sinsalo pot is?
No. What's that?
It's like a Korean shabu shabu hot pot.
Oh, yeah.
And it's actually made out of brass, and it has a round thing in the
very
center.
cool. Yes.
And you
Yeah,
drop
yeah,
like
yeah.
hot coals or
Sauce.
embers in it, and that heats up the pot.
Yes.
You can find a lot of them like on Etsy and eBay that are used. I have brand new ones that have never been used, never been sold, still have the bright, shiny brass shine to them. I have, one of the things I'm working on right now was apparently a thing that was big in the 60s, and I think this is part of what we call the Jacqueline Onassis effect. I have these silk bead necklaces, these Korean silk bead necklaces, and they're like 3/8 inch silk beads with like 1/8 inch gold beads in between. And I have hundreds of these things. And some of them have matching earrings, so they're like little silk beads wrapped with colored thread for earrings, and they have hairpins that also have the same colored beads. But apparently those became, you guys probably don't know, I need to explain the Jacqueline Onassis effect. Jacqueline Onassis was the wife of John Kennedy, and she was a very fashionable, stylish woman. And she basically created a fashion revolution around the world. This is what, I know it hit Japan hard. In the 60s, all of a sudden Japanese women started dressing Western, started dressing just like Jacqueline Onassis. I didn't realize that it also transferred to Korea. But when you think about it, it does make sense, because in the 60s, Korea was looking at Japan for fashion. That's where, Japan was the fashion leader in Asia back then. So it understands that, makes sense that the Koreans were, taking fashion cues from the Japanese, who were taking fashion cues from the Americans, who were basically taking fashion cues from the Europeans.
Everyone's just copying each other.
Yeah.
One last question, if I can, very briefly, if you can just give advice or just kind of like any last words to our younger generation here in Koreatown. Just kind of like, we don't often get to sit down and hear these stories and words, especially from a third generation American Korean. So if you can really just give any words of advice, what would you give?
Be willing to talk to and listen to anyone. Everyone knows something you don't know. And that's one of the things I used to emphasize to my kids, my students. Everyone knows something you don't know. One of the things that I think made me different when I was younger was I liked talking to older people. I liked listening to what they had to say. I learned a lot from old racers. I learned a lot from, older Koreans. I learned a lot from older artists. I learned, a lot from older guys that worked in the car industry. I still know all kinds of little tips and little things, for working on cars that I learned from, my older mechanics. And, that's the thing, be willing to listen and talk to anyone and be colorblind. I mean, some of my best friends are Japanese, Mexican, Black, Korean, Chinese, so I mean, it really doesn't matter. You're in America, you're Americans now, and I mean, as much as you want to hang on to Korean culture, and that's fine, and Korean culture will always be part of your life, you need to understand that you're in a much different society now. You're in a integrated society. One of the great things about LA is we have everybody here. I mean, one of the things I love about LA is I tell people I can get almost any kind of food in the world here almost 24 hours a day. And that's one of the great things about LA. So, be willing to talk to other people, be willing to work with other people, be willing to listen to other people. And that's the best advice I can give.